Good evening everyone. Thank you for coming to the museum tonight. Let me start by presenting our two speakers for the night. So we have on the right side, we have Aleida Vieira. She was born in Cape Verde, but grew up in Portugal, where she started engaging in migration and social justice issues during her training in journalism. She holds a bachelor's degree in language sciences from the University of Lisbon and obtained her master's degree in engineering of mediation at the University of Luxembourg. Aleida has been a family, legal, civil and commercial mediator since 2019, and she has joined several non-profit organizations focused on families and youth with a migratory background. Bernardino, on her left side, he is born in Cape Verde as well, and he got a master's degree in Anglo-American Studies at the University of Coimbra in 2012. He got his PhD in language sciences in 2018 with a focus on the socio-linguistics of Cape Verdean migration trajectories into Luxembourg at the University of Luxembourg. He is a sociolinguist committed to a post-colonial and ethnographic approach in his work. He has researched language, inequalities and mobilities in and between the global south of Europe. So the first time that my co-curator Régis Meuse and we heard in detail about this POSEC project was actually during a symposium at the University of Luxembourg in November of 2022. And in their talk, they presented their work classifying the lusophone migration into Luxembourg as a post-colonial conundrum. A very innovative and also interesting for us, interesting approach. And the presentation that they held, it impressed us because they were the only ones during the 2 full days of the symposium to challenge that notion that we all know of the communauté portugaise, of the Portuguese communities. And challenging that notion as that community as one large homogeneous and harmonic group. So we have stayed in contact with them since their talk back in 2022, and they helped us import their new vision into our exhibition as well. What the statistics are hiding is that lived diversity of the lusophone migrant workers and the relations between these people. So these two actually have looked behind the numbers and have done field research where they were able to propose a new image of these post-colonial encounters in their recently finished project. So tonight, Aleida and Bernardino will thus be able also to present some results of their work. And I guess that's enough for me, so I'm sure our two specialists, they are ready to start their talk. I also want to mention that, of course, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for everyone on YouTube later. So thank you, and thank you to Aleida and Bernardino.
Thank you, Isabelle. Bonsoir à tous. Hello, everybody. So first, let us thank you all for your presence this evening. So thank you, Régis and Isabelle, for inviting us to contribute to this very important exhibition about the Canadian Revolution. And of course, it is an honor for us to be hosted by the Nationalmusée. So for the upcoming hour, we will be discussing mostly about lusophone immobilities and mobilities. As you can see in our title of this presentation, so we propose to historicize lusophone immobilities and immobilities. Mobilities and immobilities, yeah.
So, as you can see in these slides, first we will present this POSEC project, as Isabelle just said, we just finished, and which we have investigated lusophone migration interactions in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. And then we would like also to reflect on this controversial term, lusophonia or lusophone, which reveals this controversial for its colonial load. After that, we will go into briefly revisit and reflecting on the topic of this exhibition here, Revolução dos Cravos, Carnation Revolution. And as many of you surely know, it is among the root causes of several lusophone trajectories into Luxembourg. So then within this historicization, we contextualize lusophone presence here in Luxembourg in more details, we'll try to, and their challenge too. So finally, to conclude our presentation, we will raise some questions, some more reflections and more, reflecting tones that we believe that is very relevant for the discussion and in Luxembourg surtout. So we will present alternately. So, comment on dit en français? En alternance. Mais les questions peuvent être posées aussi en français ou même en portugais si vous voulez.
Yeah. Okay, before presenting this project, we should stress here that that we are not historians, and that by historicizing, we mean what we do. We draw on some historical events, and as sociolinguistic ethnographers, we try to understand how language and those historical, or language and historical events, moments, are still imbricated, impacting Lusophone subjects' lives as migrants or descendants here in the Grand Duchy. So we have tried to nuance this understanding within the scope of this project that stands for Disentangling Post-Colonial Encounters in Globalization, a sociolinguistic ethnographic study of Lusophone migrant workers' positioning in third space, which is a 3-year project funded by the FNR at University of Luxembourg. So we started in 2021 until this year, so until 2024. So its main objective has been to understand the role of history and language on the interactions among Lusophones, so which is a complex category, as Isabel pointed, so as we also discuss in more detail later. But also the interactions between Lusophones in general society of Luxembourg, where they form the largest migrant groups. To understand their trajectories and interactions in Luxembourg, it's crucial to have some knowledge on their encounters or he-encounters in defining space or fields of their life, such as, for example, workplace and educational settings. So methodologically, as sociolinguistic ethnographers, informed by the goal of researching language not only as a system or an identity marker, but more importantly, its connection with power issues, we mainly draw on observations, spontaneous conversations, and narrative interviews, so open-ended, semi-structured focus group with Lusophones in the following fields, and sectors of work. So the service and retail industry, cleaning and construction industry, and a lifelong learning setting. And beyond, also collecting a range of official and society discourse, written and spoken, that points or index the use and role of language and history and their vital interactions in the officially trilingual Luxembourg. So we believe that observations combined with interviews are good ways to research these interactions. So in those field work sites, most of the workers, clients and learners are migrants from Portuguese-speaking countries. So we take the narrative interviews or interviews as important frames, evaluations, and self-interpretations of these migrants' own experience, rather than simply treating the narratives as factual accounts. So narratives or small stories provide a sense of how people interact with social discourse in their everyday life, and provide counter positions and ambivalence often lost in the master narratives or official narratives. So they are also ways people explain, organize, and frame the world and make sense of their own identity. So as Defina put it, so while responding to intellectors, we, the narrators, we also respond to discourse that are not necessarily uttered in our presence, but are being circulated socially. However, we know that interviews have some limitations. So we mean, because they are invested with power. So they are impacted by the way the interviewer is perceived by the interviewee, and or vice versa. So we try to reinforce our data with some video recording when allowed, because as you know, workplaces are sensitive places per se. And for security reasons, we had some limitations, and in some places that would like to collect some data, we were even denied access after some good initial conversations. So we are also still reflecting to what extent the denials could also be connected to our positionalities as researchers originally from the global south, doing research in Europe, and researching subjects that in the past were overtly declared and perceived as superior by nature. So hence, we draw theoretically on the framework what is called of coloniality. So coloniality is a theory of power mostly associated with Latin American subaltern studies. So coloniality is the everyday remnants of colonial modes and hierarchies. But it's important to disentangle, to see the meaning, the difference between colonialism and coloniality. So colonialism denotes a political and economic relation in which the sovereignty of a nation or of a people rests on the power of another nation, which makes such a nation an empire. So while coloniality instead refers to long-standing patterns of power that emerged as a result of colonialism, but that define culture, labor, intersubjective relations, and knowledge production well beyond the strict limits of colonial administration. We mean, so we can find coloniality not only in the classical colonial country, but also in other countries. Countries that define themselves as not colonial, non-colonial countries. So another concept that we draw on is the concept of third space. So this to challenge the classic narrative of the colonizer, the idea that the colonizers are somehow innately different from and superior to the original inhabitants of its colonies. So another theoretical concept that we also draw on is lusophonia and post-colonialism or post-colonial. But Aleida will say some more about lusophonia and lusophones and post-colonialism.
Yeah. So before diving into the contextualization of Lusophone migration in Luxembourg, let's briefly start by discussing this complex word, this concept of lusophone or lusophonia. So as some of you may know, of course, the meaning of this word is not always consensual, neither in academia nor beyond in the daily life of people in Luxembourg or within the Lusophone community itself. So depending on the situation or context, it triggers different interpretations or mixed feelings when uttered, this word lusophonia. So in the general understanding, lusophone is used from institutional perspectives to meaning and addressing Portuguese-speaking countries and their people. At the same time, many of those people that are assumed to be lusophone or are lumped together in this broad category of being lusophone do not really speak Portuguese, and not all of them accept or see themselves as lusophones. So some questions could already be raised from here. Can we say that it is mostly a construction of the authorities and imaginations to draw on the idea of imagined community, as Anderson puts it, in the sense that its members will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even heard from them, of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. So from the perspective of those considered lusophone, the ordinary people, this is often and just a word. To quote some of our participants in this project we started and we've been working since 2021. They limit the word lusophone to festive events because it is difficult to them to see the importance of lusophonia in their daily lives. So for their everyday struggles, lusophonia rests largely in abstract. So can we understand from this that there is a certain grassroots denial to lusophonia? So the value of it has been romanticized to a certain extent. This is another question we can raise here. However, at the same time, some of them understand that this imagined group of lusophone can be instrumentalized, useful for connections, for administrative matters, and for people trying to get by in their daily life, in migration contexts, and so on. So, as several scholars have critically stressed, lusophonia resonates la francophonie, hispanophonie, these types of X-phonias, to a certain extent, is a space of reproduction of old hierarchies in the interaction of former colonizers and former colonized countries, which reflects in the interactions among their subjects in their countries of origin and beyond when they are both migrants, like here in Luxembourg, for example. For these X-phonias carry coloniality, Bernardino just explained what it is, or they are often loaded and informed by colonial modes of interactions and ways of seeing and perceiving each other as one superior and the other inferior. Several scholars see this imagined language named community as neo-colonial projects because, to a certain extent, they are byproducts of colonialism. They continue to reproduce colonial power relation in the post-colonial period. So, concerning the prefix, going back to the word lusophonia, concerning to the prefix luso, it is problematic because it echoes Portuguese possessions and origins, especially to the ears of colonial subjects with critical thinking and more robust awareness and experience of enduring historical impacts in the present. Also, for the suffix phone, because as I said before, not all of these lusophone speak Portuguese, neither in their daily life or as part of their elements of their identity or identifications. We can go to Cape Verde and it's not a lot of people do speak Portuguese. Or Mozambique, they have also other national languages too. So in our case, for the sake of framing research, we use the adjective lusophone as an interesting artificial model, entre guillemets, as proposed by Aleida 2018 to refer to migrants from those countries from Portuguese, where Portuguese is the official language, Portugal and its former colonies, here in Luxembourg.
We would like to call your attention to the fact that talking about lusophone presence in Luxembourg often implies talking about the Canadian revolution, as we said before. In turn, we cannot talk about the later without referring to the colonial wars of independence of Portuguese African colonies in 1974. So we should remind ourselves, we should revisit the Canadian Revolution as it is a byproduct of the independence war in Africa. So there are some interesting studies on this and stress how African countries contribute to the freedom of Portuguese people in Portugal since 1974 onwards. So, for instance, in an interesting special issue, António Tomás, the scholar, argues how that the Canadian Revolution was a byproduct of the emergence of nationalist movements in Africa, when it became apparent that popular uprisings there could not be won by the conventional armed struggle. Or to put it slightly different, anti-colonial struggle in Africa opened the way not only for the end of Portuguese rule on the continent, but also for the demise of dictatorship in Portugal itself. But according to the official narrative, so it has become an almost uncontested truth that the Carnation revolutions, whose epicenter was in Lisbon, is the foundational moment that paved the way for the decolonization of Lusophone Africa. But for this scholar, Antonio Tomás, the narration of these events can be rearranged otherwise. So as I said, so the official narration, we see that the Carnation, in the official narration, Carnation Revolution took place, and then the democratic regime in Portugal started negotiating the transfer of power to the legitimate representatives of the former colonies. So, but Antonio argues that, according to him, so in fact, what has been overlooked in the overwhelming majority of accounts is that Guinea-Bissau's unilateral proclamation of independence, recognized by dozens of countries with seats in the United Nations, took place before the Carnation Revolution in 1973. When then the Portuguese government started to negotiate the sovereignty transfer, it had to admit that Guinea-Bissau was already a functioning independent country with functioning institutions such as the National Assembly. So the chronology of this event should be reversed. So the Carnation Revolution does not only follow the Guinea Revolution chronologically, but it was, for the most part, produced by it. For example, the charismatic leader of the nationalist movement in Guinea-Bissau, Amílcar Cabral, was aware that independence of the countries he was fighting for, Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, would only take place after the demise of Estado Novo, or the Salazar regime. So he stated many times that the liberation of Guinea and the end of fascism in Portugal was the same fight. Moreover, the Carnation Revolution started in the colony itself, in Guinea-Bissau, with the military situation more or less under control in Angola and Mozambique. Guinea was the only partial of the colonial empire in which the Portuguese army was contemplating the prospect of its military defeat. It was there in Guinea that the Movimento dos Capitães, movement of captains, and later on, Movimento das Forças Armadas, movement of armed force, took shape. So it was in Guinea, according to another scholar, Celis Golias, that for the first time in a meeting among officers of the Portuguese army, the word revolution was mentioned as a way to oust, to remove, to put an end to the fascist regime and put an end to the colonial war. To a certain extent, we can see that the narration of the Carnation Revolution has somewhat been romanticized and reversed, and overlooking its rooting cornerstone, the defining role of African countries on it. Now to move to, let's move to the Lusophone presence or mobility or immobility in Luxembourg. So the first interesting point about Luxembourg is that people coming from all over the world represent almost 50% of its population. So, well, we know that this is, of course, not a breaking news for no one here. So, however, what could sound interesting for some is that among this important and diverse migratory presence, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg is the country that hosts the highest percentage of the total population of Portuguese nationality worldwide, around 70% according to Statec. Most of these Portuguese or Lusophone migrants hail from Portugal and then Cape Verde and Brazil, and to a lesser extent, other African Portuguese-speaking countries such as Guinea-Bissau, Angola, São Tomé and Príncipe, and Mozambique. So several scholars have underscored that Lusophone migration flows to Luxembourg started in the 60s by the Portuguese who were trying to better life chance and escape the dictatorship regime of Salazar. So, that, as you know, lasted from 1929 until 1974. So, about this, there will be an interesting talk by Antonio Pava Paiva, who had lived experience of what he called political migration to escape that regime. So it will be here in November, if we are not mistaken. Yeah. Yeah.
So we would like to stress that migration from all these Portuguese-speaking countries into Luxembourg has been processed mostly from and via Portugal. This migration pattern can be mainly explained by 3 migratory phases or processes. Even though they were already here before, in the late 50s, there are 3 main migration phases. Firstly, the Portuguese, including some Cape Verdeans, came in the late 60s and early 70s under the scope of guest workers contracts signed by the then fascist Portuguese government and Luxembourg to fill the vacancy left by the Italians who left the country or immigrate to other European countries with better salaries. So at that time, the Cape Verdeans who came held Portuguese citizenship, so they followed the Portuguese flow into Luxembourg. But they were not very welcome at their arrival, and the guest worker contract was revised, specifying what kind of Portuguese should be coming, intending to stop Cape Verdeans. At that point, it was made explicit that race and ethnicity were key elements of migration. After that, Cape Verdeans continued to come, of course, but via family reunification, or they crossed borders secretly together with other Portuguese too. So, secondly, there has been an ongoing remigration strategy of Brazilian and African lusophone from Portugal, before and after Portugal's adhesion to European community in '86. In this line, lusophone migration intensified even more with the economic crisis in 2008, which affected Portugal more than other European countries. In the third flow and phase, there is an ongoing mobility phenomenon to Luxembourg among Brazilians of Luxembourgish descent, which started with the amendment of the citizenship law of 8 March 2017. This amendment has allowed them to acquire Luxembourgish citizenship via the reclamation procedure. That is, by proving to be direct maternal or paternal descent of an ancestor who held the Luxembourgish nationality on 1st January 19th century. Around 20,000 Brazilians has acquired Luxembourgish citizenship under this procedure, as per we can read in Contacto in August 2022. Meanwhile, it is important to stress that the majority of these new Luxembourgers of Brazilian background do not reside or have never been in Luxembourg. And, but as far as I know, this procedure it's over now. It's no longer possible. So nowadays, it is estimated that approximately 100,000 of Portuguese-speaking migrants reside in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, and from which the Portuguese formed about 99% of the total numbers. However, this number is somewhat unrealistic, especially for its overlooks of double citizenship, including the Luxembourgish citizenship, of many of these migrants originally from Portugal, African Portuguese-speaking countries, and from Brazil. For instance, the official statistics counted roughly 3,048 African migrants from Portuguese-speaking countries, this in 2020. But this number could be, of course, as all of us know, 3 times or more higher, depending on how the counting is made. So, all the above has contributed to strengthening Lusophone networks and creating an interesting Luso-Afro-Brazilian encounter and sometimes re-encounter in trilingual Luxembourg. It has made the use of the Portuguese language quite prominent in certain sectors of work, predominantly the construction and cleaning industries, and service and retail, in which most of these migrants used to work. So, all this has led some scholars to talk about a partial Lusofication of Luxembourg, where those Lusophones share workplaces and often also the Portuguese citizenship. This Lusofication is also a result of what we here putatively define as Lusophone market, Related to this, our data show us that, to a certain extent, we can see that there is a sort of ethno-stratification of the labor market here in Luxembourg, which is highly impacted by language and migrants' qualification. This lusophone market is ambivalently perceived by lusophone migrants themselves and their descendants in relation to the usage and values of the Portuguese language. This market lies mostly within the ethnic economic of the host country. The narratives simultaneously show alliance and contestation with the dominant language ideology of the nation-states, which are imbued with other identity aspects, discursive constructions, or of national identity and distribution of resources. Taken together, these interconnect factors contribute to the social marginalization of these migrants in Luxembourg. The Portuguese language is used by these migrants as an alternative tool to survive, while also contributing to social and workplace stratifications. Yet, it is important to note that the said lusophone market is not primarily a result of a political will, but rather a consequence of socio-demographic transformation, to a greater extent brought about by intensive and diverse lusophone migration, as noted above. So this has triggered an official attempt to pragmatically accommodate the significant share of population from lusophone backgrounds. The most salient and prolific case of this accommodation was during the COVID-19 pandemic, during which the Portuguese language was used in parallel with the three official languages and English in various official communication modes with the residents in Luxembourg. However, remaining in these niche markets can run counter to the legally widely implemented pressure to learn and improve the locally dominant language. This pressure has largely contributed to create mixed feelings and perceptions regarding this lusophone niche market in Luxembourg.
To give you an overview about lusophone interactions, challenges, mobility, and immobility in Luxembourg, we selected some parts of our participant narratives, and we categorized them showing both interactions within lusophone groups or individuals and lusophones in the Luxembourgish society in general or at large. So we start by the excerpt that shows racial discrimination among lusophones, also linguistic prejudice, microaggression, coloniality at work within the imagined community of lusophonia or lusophone, but also between lusophones and the general society of Luxembourg. So,
starting with racial discrimination among lusophone, this is excerpt taken from the interview with the Luxembourger with the Portuguese background. She was born in Luxembourg and can speak all the three languages of the country. She's in her early 30s and she's a manager of a hair salon. When asked about her perception about lusophone interactions in Luxembourg, this is what she said. I think the Portuguese tend to think they are better. They have the superiority complex sometimes. I'm of Portuguese origin, so I say that. That said, but it's from other older generations who still live very much under that prejudice. To say the same thing, white, white, black, black, but no, it's not. We are in the 21st century, and that's over. It's over. Those were stories of yesterday. It's true that there are still many consequences today, but in order to overcome these barriers, we have to stop this. My origin is superior to yours, mine is inferior to yours. For example, our grandparents and even our parents, there is still a lot of this prejudice, this barrier between Portuguese-speaking and African-speaking lusophones. So here we can see that for her, the racial discrimination among lusophones themselves, so between this community, is still ongoing, is still happening, but for her, this is happening mostly within the old generation, like her grandparents and parents, which for whom coloniality and old colonial ideology are still very present in the 21st century, as she pointed in her narrative. So moving now to linguistic prejudice, this excerpt is from this Luxembourgie of Portuguese descent. She said, I had teachers who automatically told me, no, German wasn't for me because I'm of Portuguese origin. So I was never going to speak German properly. Even when I got good grades in German, there were certain teachers who were really mean, you know. During tests, they'd stand right next to me to make sure I wasn't taking off notes to get the right grades, you know. But that was a long time ago, back in the 90s. But I think nowadays it's a little less than in the past. I remember at the time, the teachers at primary school said that I was going to be a cleaning lady like all the Portuguese. I took a commercial administration course, and now I became a hairdresser when I was 21 because it's something I wanted to do. So here, can we still ask this question? Is this something is still happening today in Luxembourg?
Yeah, moving to the next point about microaggression. So this is from the same participant Aleida presented. So she continued to share how locals used to react when she speaks Luxembourgish. So she said, what often happens to me is that because I have the typical Mediterranean physique, dark hair, curly hair, dark skin, and so on. So what has often happened to me is that when I speak Luxembourgish, people are amazed. They are amazed. They look at me, oh, you speak Luxembourgish. And I say, yes, I'm a Luxembourger. Oh, you are a Luxembourger. They are like this, as if it is something from another word. So the reason for this unexpectedness is a result of complex, this is how we read it. So it is a result of complex interwoven and fixed relations between race, language, and nation-state ideologies. So those interwoven fixed assumptions lead us to expect certain things to be in a certain place, for people to speak in a certain way. So she's a kind of unexpected speaker, according to this moment, yeah, to quote Pinnacock. Yeah, now let's move to coloniality at work, which brings many tensions in this post-colonial period. So this is an excerpt from the Cape Verdean who became a head of coordination department in a company where they have workers from different origins and nationalities. So when we asked him to tell us about his interactions as a Cape Verdean coordinator with other lusophones and European workers he had supervised, he explained about the relation with Portuguese and other people in construction. There is that question of superiority. When they have Cape Verdean team leader, they don't accept. So we make teams almost by kind of people. If we have an Italian team leader, we try to include the Portuguese and people more from that side, European, than from African side. So, and there will be less conflict. While Cape Verdeans and other Africans, Bissau Ghanaians, accept their leadership of Europeans as their leader, from the other side is more difficult. It is always more complicated. So there are some exceptions, but the majority of teams are made par rapport type of people to avoid conflict, not to work 3 days and then change the team members. So he went on. He went on talking about this coloniality at work. So in my case, as the general coordinator, recruiter of service, yes, there is. In the beginning, it was difficult for them to accept, so I acted very prudently to avoid conflicts. But I had a lot of criticism. They say, No, he is the boss, but I don't have an African boss. I don't have a black boss. He is the boss of nobody. He is your boss. This happens always at work. Indeed, there are many who left when I became the coordinator, but we have some exceptions. But the majority don't accept that, especially when you manage a team that is for more physical work. There is a strong feeling of injustice from their side, so it was something that I managed the best way possible. It is a pity that this continues like this, but it is the reality. So his position, we can say, is an example of a reversion of colonial hierarchies to a certain extent. But we have this tension because it is informed by this colonial way of interaction or colonial ways of perceiving each other. Yeah.
So, to conclude our talk today, we would like to leave some reflecting questions and points for discussion on lusophone presences here in Luxembourg, or maybe beyond. So let's try to disentangle the common herd togetherness of lusophone. We are trying here to understand why there is this tendency of these lusophones staying together. Despite being the ones who mostly migrate in Europe and beyond, forming important groups of migrants in various countries, the interactions among Portuguese speakers and migrants, both from Portugal and its former colonies, are rarely examined, especially considering their tendency to work in these sectors we mentioned before, like constructions and cleaning industries. And sometimes their positions in those jobs arenas are taken for granted as a result of their low formal education. We would like to stress here that independently of their formal education, they often occupy those job arenas, which are oftentimes precarious and less paid, as alternative and as a form of survival employment. Unfortunately, this has reinforced certain stigmas associated with them. As common herd sentence, all of us already heard, they do not want to integrate, or they always stay among each other and others. But this is not that simplistic as it is put by, for example, this discourse of integration of some ruling authorities of the host country, even from migrants themselves. We argue that we have to look at the broad social, historical, economic, and linguistic regimes and regulations, because migrants try to find some safe space, and this often implies navigating their group of compatriots where they may feel more accepted and included. For the lusophone group, this contributes to what we called before lusophone market, as an alternative and a way to deal with the daily struggles in the host countries, such as language, social mobility or immobility, education, and so forth.
So moving to more concrete examples, let us see the different layers of lusophone struggles, immobility or mobility into Luxembourg. So in terms of geographical mobility or immobility, for African lusophones, also known as PALOP, is mostly connected to the process of reimmigration because it is almost impossible for them to migrate to Luxembourg directly, so unless for family reunification. For other lusophones, for example, the Portuguese and the Brazilians, to a certain extent, their geographic mobility to Luxembourg is more facilitated, as they have less administrative constraints. For example, Portuguese, as part of Schengen countries, they have free mobility, of course. And Brazilians don't need visa to come to the Schengen countries for 3 months. So after that, they have to leave. So there is this case also that we mentioned of fast-tracked citizenship for Brazilians of Luxembourgish ancestry. But while in Luxembourg, all these lusophones face same intersecting challenges or immobility in different layers leading to their social immobility in this case. Because of some factors that we have already mentioned, that language issues, recognition of diploma, the role of race and citizenship. So another point that we would like to reflect on with you is the ambiguous valorization of the Portuguese language institutionally in Luxembourg. So in various written official arenas or communications, Portuguese is included, for example, in education, health, banks, also communities, and so on. But when it concerns orality, speaking, Portuguese is oftentimes even ignored or almost forbidden to a certain extent. Also at school, even when the intellectuals are both Portuguese speakers or can speak Portuguese. This points to the use of language as a tool of power and control. Another example of this is when lusophone job seekers go to ADEM, for example. If they don't speak Luxembourgish, German, French, or English, they have to bring a translator, even if their official intellectuals can speak Portuguese. So this is quite a paradox, because the second biggest group of speakers who approach this institution is of lusophone background, or they are Portuguese speakers. For example, we saw in the newspaper news from Contato that about 4,000 Portuguese are unemployed in Luxembourg, as the second biggest group of unemployed in Luxembourg. So within this Portuguese, we find, for example, other lusophones. We find the Cape Verdeans, Angolans, Brazilians, and so on. So, and also in the Luxembourgish, as the biggest group of unemployed, we find also other lusophones. We find the Portuguese, Cape Verdeans, Brazilians, and so on. So this can make us to reflect to what extent the valorization of the Portuguese language is institutionally ambiguous in Luxembourg. And for example, in a country where it's seen as a multilingual country par excellence. So this can make us reflect to what extent this multilingualism is inclusive or exclusive, to a certain extent, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Obrigado. Yeah, thank you. Merci. Yeah.
I don't know if there are questions. So Portuguese, French, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting introduction in your project. And I have two questions. The first is on the discourse, especially by Portuguese people. It seems to me that there is no discrimination between lusophones. So I suppose that this is something imported by Portugal, where this attitude is also, or this discourse is also very present. But I would like to hear your opinion on this. And I wondered if there another argument to say, or to put oneself forward as a Portuguese in relation to other Lusophone speakers, is that Portuguese people were the first group to come to Luxembourg. Does that play a role too?
Yeah. Can you please repeat the first question about the discrimination that you made?
I have the impression when I speak to Portuguese people that the discourse that I also know exists in Portugal, that Lusophone speakers, that there is no discrimination between them, that everything is fine, and that colonialism is long gone, and so on. So I wonder if you share this impression that this discourse is also circulating in Luxembourg.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this interesting question. Yeah, of course. So in our data, we have many examples of this. That this coloniality of language is still present in their interactions, and this has affected their work relations, even to tensions and so on. So, for example, if you look at several participants, they mentioned about this idea of Portuguese from Portugal and Brazil. So this is also a way, when they speak, for example, Portuguese, the variety of Brazil, they are Portuguese from the continent. Yeah, reminding that they are not speaking the right Portuguese or the best way of, and this can bring tension in their work and in their interaction. So this is very present. Also with other lusophones, this is very present. So this idea of superiority that is imbricated in the variety of certain language that you speak. So as we know, a person, if your language is valorized, you are also valorized. So if you are devalued, if your variety is devalued, you are also devalued to a certain extent. So it depends on the context. So it's a kind of, we have fluctuation. For example, if you see in Portugal, in Lusophone countries, so Portuguese has a very high level, a very high value. But in Luxembourg, when we call a third space, so you see what happened to people who speak Portuguese or to the Portuguese language. So it has a much lower value. So this, just to say that this coloniality of language is still present among Lusophones and also among people from the global north in relation to people from the global south, because this is a colonial. This is this remnant of colonial, that's colonial superiority that's imbricated in the language that you speak. You know, if we look at the whole, I mean, in a global way, what are the languages that has the more value? They are colonial language. They are English, Portuguese, French, Spanish, and so on. So just I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, and the other one is
yeah, the other one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the other question is
if there is still discrimination.
I forgot about
Sorry, we didn't.
I don't know, perhaps other people have questions too. I don't want to monopolize. Yeah. But one idea was this idea that there is this feeling of superiority, and it's expressed in these language relations. But the other thing that I think is this discourse on colonialism is over, we are all on the same level, and there is no racial discrimination. And my feeling is that it's the same discourse that also exists in Portugal, that it came with the Portuguese people to Luxembourg.
Yeah.
And then the other question was if this feeling of superiority also has something to do with being the first immigrants, the immigrant group that came to Luxembourg of Lusophone people.
Yeah, to a certain extent we say yes, because also we had in our data some other Lusophones asking this question, the same question. It's because they came first. They think that the country is Luxembourg is there because we have a lot of reproduction of colonial interactions in their workplace. Normally, or most of the time, the Portuguese are the boss, and then you have the other Lusophone, independently of their formal education. So independent, and in their interactions, the Portuguese are, how can I say, they transmit this idea of being a teacher, lecturing the others how to do things correctly. That's not correct. Even if they are working well, they have this tendency to show that, according to the data, to show that they are the manager, and sometimes even if they are not the manager, even if they are not the manager.
Of course, the coloniality is still present. It's an ideology, it's a mentality. And what we observe in our data is that there is a slightly difference between old generation and the second generation, the younger generation, because the younger generation, they are open to discuss at least, and to point out, as we saw it, to point the finger to things that they know their parents and grandparents are not open at all to discuss about it. And And this maybe is not denying that the racism among Lusophones still exists, but it's just for the older generation, what I feel is like during colonial period and Salazar regime, there were so few words that were forbidden, like colonies, racism, and mixed. These kind of words were pejorative, so they were forbidden to use that. Maybe they are avoiding to use that nowadays because it's still having this heavy pejorative meaning to these words.
And just one sentence. And just this idea of coloniality, sometimes it manifests, we are not aware of that, because it's part of a habitus. It's part of a way of seeing the world, a way of seeing the order. So it happens in an, we don't have awareness all the time about this, so, because it's a habitus. Yeah.
Thank you very much also from my side for the very interesting presentation, and I still think it's your research is for Luxembourg very, very innovative in approach, and I hope that also other historians working on colonial history of Luxembourg, for example, will also be in touch with you to integrate also to be in dialogue with you for their results in their research. I just want to add things to what René said. In my research about colonial history, I think it's not, what I saw is it's not very Portuguese specific to say it's over. Dat hört ja nicht mit mir zu tun, dat hört ja nicht mit uns zu tun for Luxembourgish colonial history, something you really hear very, very, very often, which is maybe also a specificity for Portugal, is this ideology of the lusophone that was embedded in the official presentation of the ultramar, of that during the colonial period itself, it was said, we are not racist, we are different from other colonizers, which actually also the Belgians said and the French said with other terms and with other ideologies, but it was a way to hide social, racial hierarchies in the colonies and also in the metropolis. So I think it's not because, and you said older generations, it's something I also saw during the exhibition about the colonial past of Luxembourg. There are discussions because, as you said, people that were educated and believed what was said 50 years or 60 years ago have other ways to, and I think there's the very important role of school, that today young people are confronted with other frames of thinking, with other, that they are aware of the bias that are in these situations. So I think it's maybe it's hope that things will change with the time. And I also just wanted to add something about also invisibilization of people of color in Luxembourg in history. Are the Portuguese, the white Portuguese from the continent, really the first one that came? Yeah, we have no statistics, but if you look in historical sources, there are Cape Verdeans also in Luxembourg, at least from 1965 on. They are embedded, as you said, in this first, we just don't have statistics, we cannot count them. But they were also invisibilized, and today you have many newspapers of the time that are online, so you can follow some perceptions. And you have, I think of one article of the Luxemburger Wort of 1977, where you have the group of Cape Verdeans of Ettelbruck that are interviewed, and they say Luxembourgers are racists. So there are things we have maybe forgotten, but that were present at the time. And I think there are people here in the room that can better speak about that time than myself. But also Cape Verdeans are in Luxembourg, present in Luxembourg, visibly present in Luxembourg for 60 years. It's not something that is new in the contemporary society.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
It was very interesting and I got a lot of new informations. I would ask you if you noticed a kind of a difference between Portuguese and Africans when both met, for instance, or lived together in Portugal before coming to Luxembourg, or if they, the elder ones at least, were soldiers in the colonial war. Has that any influence on their living together now here in Luxembourg?
Yeah, thank you for this interesting question. Yeah, and yeah, we can say that there are some nuances also because in terms of citizenship, when you, as we talk about reimmigration strategy, so as you see, as we know, so Portugal is a kind of door to come to Europe. And then they stay there for about 5 or 6 years, if I'm not wrong. And when you get citizenship, you go to other European countries. So in Luxembourg, if I'm not wrong, most of the, for example, Cape Verdeans who are here, they have European citizenship, mostly from Portugal. Yeah, there are some participants aware of this. When you come from Portugal, they say Portugal is a kind of internship place to Europe. But when they are here in Luxembourg, it's we have, for example, a participant that said, for us, I mean Portuguese with the Cape Verdeans, Cape Verdeans stressing that Portuguese they don't need to say anything because only the look, we know what they want, what will happen. So that they know the Portuguese very well, and that, yeah, anything they say, so they know about their interactions. That was not very, too positive in Portugal, and these interactions can be replicated in here. And many of them try to get distance from other Portuguese because of this colonial mindset that they reclaim, that the Portuguese still have this colonial mode of seeing them as inferior. Yeah, as inferior. Also, some Brazilians they also share the same experience with them.
What we see in the project is that Luxembourg plays an interesting role as this third space, as we said.
Yeah.
This is where these colonial hierarchies can be questioned, can be how to say it? Yeah, can be questioned. There is few, but cases of reversion of these colonial hierarchies that puts Portuguese in the inferior, hierarchically speaking, than Cape Verdean, for example. This is something that is very rare to happen in Portugal, for example, where they are in their own country. Here, they are both in this role of migrants. Yeah. So, to some extent, we can feel that they are in the same level, but still the coloniality still happens here. But still, because of this third space, as quite neutral, but not neutral, we know, impact their relationship and their interactions. So there is this possibility of reversion or replication of colonial hierarchies here also.
Yeah, there is this possibility of reversion, I would say reversion, but this reversion comes with challenges because it's not accepted. Your position is, I mean, if we think about work, if you have a Portuguese has a Cape Verdean manager, they have also many tensions because of this coloniality, because they tend to not accept the position.
Yeah, also the language plays an interesting role here in Luxembourg, because we had one participant, he got higher position in the job because he do speak French, for example, and Portuguese did not speak French. So because of the language also he got this the job position. And this also puts him in a very delicate situation with Portuguese. Yeah, I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if we asked.
Yes, I have one more question, and it actually fits because, well, it's not really a question, it's more of a reflection. I don't know, reflection. What is your take on maybe introducing Portuguese as one of the official languages of Luxembourg? What is your take on that? Because you said, while you were talking about the Adam and that you need a translator even if you don't need one, which I didn't know.
Yeah.
And yes, about Luxembourg presenting itself very multilingualist, but being multilingual just because it's more than two. Yeah, what is your take on that?
Yeah, thank you for, this is a very difficult question. So let's say, what we see, we believe that the value of language also need to reflect the contribution of people from the society, to a country. Or even we can see, for example, if we see the use of Portuguese here is very huge. For example, even as we said, even in official arenas, they are used a lot as a way of accommodating this huge percentage of lusophone population here to interact to a certain extent. But at the same time, for example, we see, for example, how people, lusophones, are being discriminated in various arenas because they speak Portuguese. When they speak Portuguese, to a certain extent, for example, at school, they tend to be seen as, for example, inferior to a certain extent. And there are many episodes in the educational system, at school, because of speaking Portuguese. And we even, not only in the past, but now, still now, there are some people being, how can I say, oppressed because they speak Portuguese, even if they are speaking to one another. And this, when you oppress a language, when you devalue a language in a certain extent like this, with it that people who speak that language, it has an impact on them. So they can also feel inferior because their language are inferior. The language they speak, they are inferior. But what do we say? What do we want to say that Luxembourg, Portuguese need to be officially more recognized. More recognized. Not only to be, we don't want to say that it should be an official language or the third official language or something like this. But I think there is some room to make multilingualism really more inclusive itself. Not an exclusive multilingual in this case that oppress people, but try to include the language in order to communicate, to move on, not to exclude to a certain extent. This is what we see, for example, in Luxembourg. For example, when to assess certain resources like jobs, even when there is not a need to speak certain language, those languages are there in order to, to select, in order to. But I think that there is a room to find, to make it a more inclusive multilingualism instead of excluding. Yeah. I don't know if I answer your question, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. More questions? No.
Yeah.
So, since there are not any other questions, I want to thank you very, very much for your presentation. It was very interesting and also very, it touched on some subjects that we should talk a little bit more often about here. And yes, well, thank you for coming here tonight, and also thank you for everyone who watched online. I also want to just quickly mention our next presentation, that it's exactly 1 week from today. It's in Luxembourgish, so I'll present it in Luxembourgish. And the title is Portugiesische Diktatur, Kolonialkriege und Revolution am Kino by Yves Stuychen. And it's at the same time at 6 p.m. on the 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.